said, I used to be the Chief Scientific Advisor. Luckily, I stood down, so I'm a bit more relaxed these days. But I'm going to talk to you about the Strategic Priority Fund, which Ian Boyd, Chris Whitty and myself were successful in winning money from the Treasury and through the UKRI. And I'm going to say why we think that's important and to flag why we believe that working in the UK can benefit all of us, but it also sets a great case study for how we can transform global systems. And in fact, transforming things locally, regionally, nationally can be sometimes easier than trying to tackle things at the global scale. So I don't think we need any convincing anymore of the importance of the food system. I mean, many of us are saying this before, but actually, even if you take COVID, I mean, the COVID, the most likely origin appears to be a wet food market. The implications of diet on what sort of outcome you will get from COVID is more and more is being revealed by the week. Initially, aspects around non-communicable diseases like diabetes and obesity. Secondly, implications to the immune system. And thirdly, the kind of health inequalities which have been exposed are those same health inequalities that food is so pivotal in terms of creating that inequality. So it's never been a better time for us and people in this area to work on food systems. But at the same time, many people turn around and say, well, don't be too critical of the food system because it actually has delivered a lot. It's delivered a lot, and that's one of the things that Henry Dimbleby and his colleagues in the National Food Strategy, I think, flagged quite importantly, in which what it was set to do, it somewhat delivered, but actually the world has moved on, and we've recognised some of the trade-offs in delivering that, and we are at a point now saying, okay, is it a tipping point? Is it a point in which we need to take action in the same way of the climate change? Because if you don't take action now, you may go through into a state in which the implications on health and the environment are more significant. So Judith kind of flagged the deaths in the world associated with diet. In the UK, it's 1 in 7, so it's not a lot different from what you see on the world. And as I said, that kind of aspect of the amount of overweight and obesity in the UK is very high. And in fact, it's Chris Whitty who actually first said to Ian Boyd and myself that he found it interesting that the implications on actually threatening the NHS. We hear a lot about protect the NHS. Chris Whitty, before COVID, flagged that he was worried about the NHS coping with issues such as diabetes and other things in terms of the costs to the NHS of treating those. And at the same time, he heard Ian Boyd saying, actually, we've got to make farming more sustainable. And he heard me saying, you know, the British public are having troubles in terms of who they trust and how they can really choose things and vote and choice, like Judith was saying. So actually, we have a situation in which the health aspects were kind of flagged, and that gave us the momentum to kind of work together and say, well, what does this mean? Well, what we know is if we look at the children and the adolescents, a worrying trend in the UK. I mean, colleagues at Southampton have done a lot of work on the first 1,000 days and how important that is. This is going further than those first 1,000 days, and it's showing in terms of overweight, obesity, etc., kind of increasing over a very short time frame. And this is the future. These are the future people who then go on to have children themselves, etc., etc. A kind of a worrying trend. And I feel slightly embarrassed showing a nutritional chart in front of an esteemed audience of nutritionists. But what this shows you is on the left-hand side how both in the UK and globally, that's why addressing it UK is a great case study. UK or globally or within Europe, for these key nutrients, we are eating less than the recommended levels. But on the right-hand side, apologies for vegetables and whole grain being at the bottom, but if you look at the top ones there, the nutrients and products which we shouldn't be eating in high amounts, we're eating way above that. So you have a stark situation here which shows some of the health aspects. So if we move on and look at the environment, we heard earlier about the implications on whether it be from soil biodiversity to greenhouse gas emissions to water. And we can just choose a range of these. And in fact, one of the commentaries that you read a lot about in terms of COP is that whilst agriculture and food was present there, was it present enough? And there's quite a lot of commentary about at the next one, maybe it should be more centre stage as a way of addressing climate change, as beautifully illustrated by Judith earlier. So if we look at some metrics here, this is a complex basket of about 42 measures of environment, and we can look at where the UK sits relative on these. And what you can see there, the UK is in position of about number 7. But the first obvious thing here, which is, some of us might be slightly worried about, is the top countries are all European. And therefore, the European legislation regulation, you might argue, has done a great job in protecting the environment. But at the same time, we know even in the UK, the environmental impacts of land use change and agriculture have been quite significant. So we have a situation in which the UK are managing their environment much better than many other countries, but we know it's still being damaged. So therefore, another good reason by working in the UK, where the situation is perhaps better than some, but if we can move the dial here, we can learn ways of moving the dial which will perhaps have even bigger impact in some of the other countries. And the fact is, as again, really well illustrated, is you have to ask your question of how much of some of that is because of us offsetting where buying food from countries lower down on that chart. So there we have the environmental measures. Importantly, if you're going to transform a system which actually employs more people than cars and planes added together and generates a huge amount of money to the UK economy, you've got to consider the economics. And one of the interesting things here is we know that actually for every £1 spent, there's in the order of £1 kind of to the taxpayer in terms of the costs of the current food system, which we've also heard is extremely complex. This is the resource trade flows. This shows the agricultural flows around the world. And what it shows is that actually our trade deficit's about £22.5 billion. We export 14.5. We bring in £37 billion of agricultural commodities. And if we look at the next chart, what that shows to you is that we trade with about 183 countries around the world, but the principal 6 were all European. How will that change? How will that change moving forward in terms of the trade dynamics, and how will it change in terms of actually addressing some of the environmental and health issues that I've just previously flagged? And so that brings me to the point that actually we believe that you need to take this food systems type approach. This is the lovely diagram produced by Kelly Parsons and Corinna Hawkes at City University, which illustrates your classic view of a food chain in the middle there, but how politics, health, the environment, etc. interact with that. And this is a very connected system. So by pulling one lever is going to potentially have multiple effects. And the reason we work in a system is that it would be very foolish to maybe just address a health issue which had a negative environmental issue. And that's why when Chris Whitty from the Department of Health, Ian Boyd from DEFRA, and myself from the Food Standards Agency said, let's try and work together on this, you were trying to ensure that you delivered answers and solutions which would actually ensure that all the metrics moved in the right direction. And so that's when we worked with UKOI to put forward a bid to the Treasury, and were successful in winning £47.5 million, and it's a project that has up and running now. And I'm just going to illustrate a little bit about that to you in the remaining time. So we're aiming to try and transform the UK diets to be healthy and sustainable, changing the behaviour of actors in that food system, modelling, which is very important in projecting forwards, because we can only run on the ground for a few years, modelling how that works, and co-producing the research, as I illustrate to you, is very important. And very importantly here, generating the future leaders, the people that will actually continue to lead throughout the system what we need. We've already produced a number of reports. On the left-hand side there, a report on the UK food system, interestingly showing what we often call the missing middle. So there's a lot of research in agricultural production, there's a lot of research perhaps in certain aspects of consumption. Very little in terms of, shall we say, there's a lot of research within the private sector in aspects around processing and that type of work. But if you go into the, say, the academic sector or the universities or research institutes, there's a lot less. And yet that's where most of the economy is made, and that's where most of the people are employed. So we need to think about that missing middle. And in the middle on the right-hand side, a report which Kelly Parsons did for us on the complexities of policies and which policies drive what change, and looking around the world in terms of how that might work. And then importantly on the right-hand side, using that sort of approach with a very specific question, procurement and public procurement, and the role perhaps that the government and various others can make in setting examples in public procurement to illustrate how you can transform and make a difference. And obviously doing that in the UK is a great role model for doing it elsewhere. So so far we've funded 4 consortia, and you're going to hear about one later today. One of these consortia is which I won't explain because Bob Doherty will talk about that a little bit later. That's led out of York University. Another one which is linking healthy soils with healthy food and production, and that's led out of Sheffield University. And we've just produced some nice videos about these, and I was going to hand them on to Judy so she can circulate them too. These are sort of 6-minute videos which illustrate to you what this work is all about. A third project based in communities in Tower Hamlets, Plymouth, Brighton and Reading, deprived communities, working with the communities to try to transform the foods that are being produced and available, which are better for their health and also the environment. A wonderful kind of video showing the real challenges that 21% of people in the UK experience food poverty on a regular basis. I mean, it's a shocking statistic, actually, and COVID has exposed that even more. And then the final, using Birmingham and the wider communities to look at an example of a city. And right at the end, if I have time, I have a video of the Director of Public Health in Birmingham saying why working on Birmingham is a great case study for elsewhere. And then we have a doctoral training centre which is going to train 62 PhD students. And this doctoral training centre involves multiple government departments, multiple businesses, and every one of those 62 students will spend part of their training outside of academia with those organisations looking at projects around transforming the UK food system. And success to me would be of those 62, them being populating businesses and organisations throughout that sector. 62 of them staying in the university at the end is a failure. 62 of them being mainly outside of universities, but maybe just a few who stay in the university thing, is success. And that's what we're really interested in. So to give you some examples, we already have 25 universities involved. We have more than 50 organisations involved with those 4 consortia. We have 17 government bodies, 31 private sector organisations, 12 charities involved in that doctoral training centre, training the next generation. And as I was joking, we're beginning to look like a Formula One racing team because we're getting lots of kind of the images here. And we have the call too, which is live now, which will bring on a number of other projects. So as you can see, we're forming an incredible network in the UK of research institutions, private organisations, government departments, etc., which we think is what's necessary if we really are going to transform the UK food system. I've mentioned the objectives, and I am running out of time a little bit. So we had to produce a logic model, the Treasury liked this type of thing, before they kind of handed the money over. But these are the sorts of impacts that we want from our consortium. And hopefully these are the sorts of things which you will see will hopefully deliver the things that Judith was saying are absolutely essential in terms of transforming the food system. Changing diet health and behaviour, changing the policy advice, food systems approach taken by people. The UK recognised as a world leader, so it will be a case study which can be rolled out in the wider world. And a trained cohort of food systems thinkers. And then finally, the longer term aims are largely environmental, health and socio-economic. So these are the things that the models will help us with. Aspects around improving the QALYs and the DALYs, and that we've heard about earlier in terms of maybe reducing childhood obesity. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions, halting biodiversity loss. These are things which will be very difficult to demonstrate in 5 years, but these are things in which demonstrating direction of travel, movement in the right way, using models to predict longer-term effects, will actually begin to show that we're on the right way, on the right path. And we're working with our consortia and all of our grant holders to use this type of thinking to determine where you want to be or what you want to deliver in 10 or 20 years to actually enable you to do the work today, which is going to enable that movement forward. And so that brings me to, this is Justin Barney, the Director of Public Health at Birmingham, who's working with one of our consortia, the Mandala Consortium in Birmingham, and this is what he had to say.
Food is essential to life. Food is essential to the way that we lead our lives. Food has huge benefits, but it also has huge negative impacts, from its impact on climate change to the way that poverty and food interact, so that people struggle and have to make a hard choice between paying their bills or putting food on the plate for their children. We need to be better at what we do in the UK when it comes to tackling the food system and creating a food system that works for all citizens. And we need to do that both in the context of cities and communities in the UK, but also in the context of the global system in which the food system runs. What happens in Birmingham is connected to what happens in Bangladesh as much as it's connected to what happens in Bradford. And it's only through working through researchers and global academic networks as well as UK ones that we will really start to understand how we shift and adapt to a global food system, a UK food system and a local food system that truly provides a delicious and exciting diet that keeps our people alive and healthy for now and for the future. So I'm really excited about the opportunity.
So thank you very much, and I hope that illustrates how important it is in projects like this to work with people who are looking after the public health of millions of people in Birmingham. Thank you.